So if you're waking up from nightmares at 3 a.m., pretty much any article you read is going to tell you that this is from stress or from some past trauma or from too much screen time or social media, which could really be a trauma in itself. But they don't tell you what's actually triggering this, which can be your gut. So in this video, we're going to go over 5 different digestive issues that can be writing the script for your dreams, and none of them have to do with your mental state. So your enteric nervous system, which is this network of neurons all through your digestive tract, has the ability to send signals through the vagus nerve to your brain to let it know when things are going wrong. Hey, be on high alert. We have trouble down here. So when the brain is receiving this stress, high alert signal, it wants to write a story that goes along with that. So it's not really the nightmare that is the problem, it's whatever's triggering this alarm to send the signal of stress in the body, and all of a sudden you're having a dream of your mother-in-law triggering this band of flying monkeys attacking you at your wedding. So in this video, we're going to go over some studies. It's okay if I'm standing in front of these. We'll make them big when we talk about them. And I'm going to put links to all these studies in the description below that are going to help you understand these different aspects that can go wrong in your gut that can actually trigger this alarm. So the first thing that we want to look at is nocturnal hypoglycemia. And this study here on abnormal nocturnal behavior due to hypoglycemia helps us understand that when a person has a sugar crash in the middle of the night, that the body will make adjustments for this by raising cortisol and adrenaline to allow the body to function while this blood sugar is going very low. And that's basically an alarm going off. So the brain scripts this physiological alarm as a nightmare because it wants a narrative for this fight or flight state. So your nightmare is not a psychological thing, it's your endocrine system setting off an alarm and triggering this into action. Now this is really going to be magnified for people that have low minerals in the system. Maybe their blood pressure is low is usually a good sign of that, because when minerals and glucose both go low at the same time, that really stresses the body out. So for some people, raising those minerals in the system can help that. And I'm just talking about minerals that we get from food. We'll talk about why they might be low here in a second, but this will often be seen with people that are type 2 diabetic or maybe insulin resistant, where the insulin is really going really high to try to process this glucose, and then it finally processes enough and sweeps way too much out. Or for people that their insulin is acting like a bully and they're processing that too aggressively. And this is usually from people that are eating too many carbohydrates and sugars, and it's getting the body to process that in an overly bully type situation. And we're going to talk about how this can relate to digestion here in a second. But first, let's look at this second issue of this serotonin pipeline failure. And basically what we need to understand is that the body needs the amino acid tryptophan to be able to make serotonin, that feel-good hormone, and then we need serotonin to make melatonin, which is in charge of this REM sleep cycle. So the problem is that a lot of people don't have enough tryptophan to make this happen. And that's usually going to be from a problem with a lack of stomach acid. A lack of stomach acid can also restrict our ability to get all the minerals out of the food we were eating, like we were just talking about. So let's look at this study here on chronic use of proton pump inhibitors, and they say that chronic PPI use may contribute to the development of mood disorders by disrupting amino acid metabolism and neurotransmitter anabolism through several mechanisms, including the blockade of specific enzymes, dysregulation of gut microflora, malnutrition of vital nutritional cofactors, and most importantly, prevention of adequate amino acid utilization through absorption and dietary proteins. So basically, we get these amino acids by breaking down the proteins that we consume. But to break down proteins, we need to have enough stomach acids. So this study is showing us that people that use PPIs that turn off our body's ability to make stomach acid have these problems with amino acids going low. The truth is that a person doesn't need to be on a PPI to have stomach acid issues. A person can just be stressed, and that can restrict the body from making enough stomach acid. There's quite a few issues that can stop a person from making enough stomach acid, and now they can't break down proteins to access this tryptophan. So now we don't have enough tryptophan to make enough serotonin or melatonin, and that's going to create some dysregulation in that REM and kind of interrupt those sleep cycles. And when we're jabbing in and out of those sleep cycles too much, that has the ability to create nightmares and crazy dreams as well. Now, to understand other issues that can trip this pathway up, let's look at this study here on gut microbiota and sleep that helps us understand that when someone has a dysbiosis or there's some type of bad bacterial overgrowth in that large intestine there, that can create a lot of inflammation, and when inflammation is high in that digestive tract, it can raise this IDO enzyme. And when this IDO enzyme goes high, it will basically steal the tryptophan and put it down what's called this chylorhinine pathway to create more inflammatory metabolites to deal with this inflammation. So now the brain doesn't have the ingredients that it needs to create the melatonin for this REM. So now our sleep cycles are going to be fragmented, creating a lot of trouble. So the other problem with the dysbiosis issue is that that's really going to reduce the amount of these small chain fatty acids like butyrate that are created by these good gut bacteria that we have in our gut. And things like this butyrate here are used as signaling molecules to kind of travel through the blood or to signal the vagus nerve to kind of activate that REM sleep. So basically when butyrate is low, that can disrupt sleep. It can increase nighttime wakefulness and fragmented sleep. So if these good bacteria are our dream factory, then when the factory is not working great, the output is going to be nightmares. So all these things with dysbiosis can be a really big issue. And these studies talk about the most common things that can cause these dysbiosis issues are things like chronic stress, processed foods, antibiotic use, or PPI use that turns off that stomach acid. Because remember, the stomach acid is not just there to help us break down proteins into amino acids, it's also the barrier to the whole digestive tract. When these bad guys come in on the food that we're eating, they're supposed to die in an acid bath. So if that stomach acid isn't there, the front door is open, and that can really lead to those dysbiosis type issues. Now, another thing that we want to think about when we come back to this number one issue is that I find that a lot of hypoglycemics usually turn out that way because they're kind of gravitated towards eating more carbohydrates and sugars because they don't have the stomach acid to break down proteins or the proper bile flow to emulsify dietary fats. So they feel really lousy when they eat proteins or fats. So they start gravitating more towards those carbs and sugars. But if they could fix that low stomach acid, then they don't need to eat so many carbs and sugars, and that can correct that hypoglycemia issue. So to look at number three, let's look at this study here on dreams and food sensitivities. And this was a recent study with more than 1,000 participants, and they said that 25% of those people said that specific foods had the ability to make their sleep or dreams worse. And they called this food-dependent dreaming. And they said that the foods that seemed to create the most amount of trouble for most people were either desserts or sweets or dairy. And we can understand this desserts and sweets things, that would really affect those people with the hypoglycemia and creating those big spikes. When you eat a lot of carbs and sugars late at night, you can really create those big spikes that create a big crash that's going to create that alarm. So a lot of these people that are dealing with hypoglycemia can just reduce the amount of carbs that they're eating at night, and that can kind of even things out and let that blood sugar stay on a more even keel. But we also teach people how to fix their chemistry to make their insulin not such a bully. And I'll have a link in the description below for our video on fixing hypoglycemia if you need to dig into that a little bit more. But this study helped us understand that it's not just in your head. The people that were having trouble with the dairy were lactose intolerant. So they didn't have the right enzymes to process that lactose, or they could be having a food sensitivity issue to that dairy. So they said that if you're having dreams of a giant block of cheese chasing you through the Home Depot, that could confirm lactose intolerance, or maybe a fear of DIY. They were a little fuzzy on that, and I may have made up that last part. But we need to understand that when a food is creating this stress alarm in the body, that's going to do the same thing as any other stress or alarm. A lot of people with these nightmares will say, oh, I got to fix the stress in my life, but they don't fix the stress in the body. So we also want to understand that it's not just dairy. Things like gluten or a leaky gut issue can create a food sensitivity to a wide variety of foods. And I'm not going to dig too much into leaky gut, but this is basically an issue that comes about that's very common when there's some type of dysbiosis issue going on and food particles are getting into the bloodstream. We'll have a link in the video below about how to fix leaky gut. So you can see that you may have some homework to do after this video. We can look and see what's causing them, but you might have to do some work to figure out how to fix that issue for you. Now, the next thing we want to look at are overgrowth issues. Things like H. pylori or SIBO, or small intestinal bacterial overgrowth in the small intestine. These issues have the ability to really increase inflammation, like we were talking about. That inflammation can really set off the alarms, but it can also raise histamine issues and even lean somebody towards this histamine intolerance problem. So there's a number of studies here that show that H. pylori can really affect our sleep, but let's look at this study here on the histamine and the regulation of wakefulness. And basically, when there's damage to this intestinal tract, this DOA enzyme is not produced as much. And this is an enzyme that helps us clear histamine from the system. But histamine is a primary wakefulness neurotransmitter, which helps us understand why antihistamines can make us really sleepy. But these histaminergic neurons fire at maximum capacity during wakefulness, and they go pretty much all the way quiet when we sleep. But if someone has uncleared histamine in their system while they're sleeping, that can reactivate those neurons and create that wakefulness and disrupt the sleep, and especially that REM, kind of knocking somebody in and out of that REM too much and creating that nightmare type situation. So it's really important that we clear that histamine, and if you have troubles with that, we'll have a link in the description for our histamine video that'll help you understand steps that can improve that scenario. But let's look at number 5, which is nocturnal GERD, and we'll look at this study on gastroesophageal reflux disease and sleep disorders, and they helped us understand that like 79% of people with reflux have documented nighttime symptoms. So from this study, it appears that every episode of reflux that the body experiences can knock the person out of deep sleep, back into that REM state, and kind of get them in that cycle of nightmare time. So what we want to understand is that this is really about a lower esophageal sphincter at the bottom of the esophagus that's not closing correctly and allowing that acid to come back up. The trick is that sphincter is triggered by stomach acid. So reflux is most commonly caused by a lack of stomach acid, not too much stomach acid like advertisers want us to believe. But this study found that when somebody went on a PPI that turned off stomach acid, that it had the ability to improve their symptoms and their sleep, but only for the short term. So if we think about it, well, a PPI, we know that that's going to turn off stomach acid, which turns off our ability to break down proteins correctly and access those amino acids to make all these things happen. And now with a lack of stomach acid, we're opening the front door for these overgrowth issues and all that inflammation and dysbiosis, so we can see how that would create a lot of trouble down the road. But if we can fix the underlying cause of reflux, now we don't have all those episodes waking us up and taking us out of that deep sleep. We've made a lot of videos about acid reflux. And remember, if your doctor's telling you to use a PPI, I'm not telling you not to do that just because these studies are talking about the downsides that can occur. I'm not a doctor. I'm not giving anybody medical advice. I'm basically just a professional stand-up comic turned nutrition author, because when I lost my voice for 8 years and 23 different doctors couldn't figure that out, I had to dig for my own answers. So now for 20 years, I've been teaching health professionals in more than 40 countries how to help their clients fix the actual underlying causes of problems instead of just the symptoms. But we will have all these studies linked below, so you can go through those and figure out the right questions to ask your doctor. But you can see with all these issues, if we can fix this hypoglycemia, that would turn off that alarm. If we can make this pipeline work and we can actually break down proteins into the amino acids, now we have that tryptophan available. If we can get rid of any inflammation or any kind of dysbiosis issue going on, now we're not taking the tryptophan and using it for other purposes. So that becomes very important with this dysbiosis we talked about in number 2, and these overgrowth issues that we talked about in number 4. So taking steps to reduce those overgrowths, we have lots of videos on how to do those things. Those can help improve those issues. With food sensitivities, it can be about, first of all, breaking food down correctly, but then also fixing any leaky gut issues like we talked about. And then this GERD is just about fixing the reflux. So if you're new to this channel and you don't know how to do any of these things with your digestion, we have a totally free digestion course that kind of walks you through figuring out which aspects of digestion are not working correctly for you and steps you can take to improve that. So that can be a really big deal, and we'll have the link to that totally free course in the description below. But you can see there's a variety of issues that could really be creating this emergency alarm that's causing your nightmares. And if you can fix them, you can have fun dreams. Fun dreams can be a lot better than the flying monkey, Home Depot, crazy cheese sauce time. So I want to see you fix these things so that you can have a better night's sleep. Now, if it's not just nightmares, if you're actually having a hard time sleeping, you can jump over right now and check out our video on how to fix insomnia for good. I can't wait to hear about your results.